Hi, Pippa. We're talking to Pippa Burns from Wollongong. She's an academic and also particularly researching crochet and wellbeing. So, just thinking about the pandemic first up, Pippa, how are you sort of feeling and coping through this time of change over the last few months?
We're pretty much going day to day. So I live with my partner and two girls who are aged 11 and 12. So I've got them both learning from home. Um, I say that very loosely because I think we're embracing the concept of free schooling. It's certainly not homeschooling. Um, but they're doing pretty well considering. My husband got laid off or stood down pretty soon in the piece, so he's been at home as well. So that's helped in terms of, well, it helps and it doesn't help because there's more of
Yeah.
you at home.
Yes.
um, but essentially, we're just focusing on trying to maintain some level of harmony. Like, not much really seems that important at the moment. So we've got routines, but yeah, I'm only pushing so hard with the schoolwork because I just don't think it's worth the aggro at the other end.
And so I guess in terms of if I'd love to know more about the research that you are doing and where that's up to, because that's how you came to my attention looking at the particular handcraft of crochet and its effect on well-being and managing mental health. So can you tell us some more about that?
Sure. So a few years ago, a colleague and myself started, like we both realized we both crocheted and were saying, oh, it would be great to do some research around crocheting. And so I started having a look about what had been done in the area around crochet and health, and found that there was nothing. Like, there's a lot of anecdotal documentaries, for want of a better word, where people talk about the impact it's had for themselves, but there's nothing where people have looked at groups of people. But what I did find was that Betts and Corkill in the UK had looked quite considerably at the impact of knitting on well-being. And so I contacted Betson to see if we could use her survey with the crocheters, because the nice thing about doing that was it meant that we could compare the questions directly. It wasn't something similar but not quite the same. And she kindly agreed to that. And so almost exactly 2 years ago, I launched this crochet survey, which got a ridiculous amount of attention worldwide, which is how come you found out about it. And it literally went viral. Martha Stewart was profiling it. It was everywhere at the time. And we had over 8,000 people respond, which was amazing, from over 80 countries worldwide, which again was amazing because it was a survey that was only released in English language. So everyone was responding to the survey in English. And what it showed us was that people reported significant positive impacts on their well-being from crocheting. The other things that I think it showed us that are really important now in the time of the pandemic was that it made people feel useful to be crocheting, and it made them feel part of society. And I really think that's important at the moment. One of the other strands that came through that you made me think about at the start, while you were talking about your beautiful shawl you've got on, was the connection it provided for people across generations. And I really didn't expect to see that, but we had, at the end of the survey, I just had a free text box that said, is there anything else you want to tell me? And so like over 50% of respondents wrote something, and people shared in some detail their experiences, both of using crochet to get through bad times of either illness or high stress times, such as divorce or losing a loved one. But they also talked about this connection across generations of how it was meaningful to produce something for future generations, or the connection they had of using stuff like crochet hooks or yarn that had been passed down generations. And yeah, I hadn't expected to see that, but that obviously really resonates for a lot of people.
So that's the whole finding meaning aspect. And I should just say that this is my great grandma did this sort of crochet, and she just made so many of these. And I love that memory of seeing her doing it. It's not something, I don't do this type of crochet myself. Mainly I'm just doing crochet hacking to, you know, extend garments and that sort of thing. But so just getting back to the thing about, is it the meaning that comes with the handmade, do you think, that people were reflecting on?
I think it's the meaning. I think it's the feeling useful, and I think it's the focus. So people were saying, like, there were connections around it being a mindful process, because when you're crocheting, you're counting the number of stitches, and that there's similarities between counting stitches and doing a meditation. So you're in the moment and you're not thinking about whatever stress or burden that you're carrying at that time. And so I can certainly see that, like, people crocheting or doing any handicrafts at the moment, it would be a really useful way of people being centered and being in the moment and not thinking about, well, when is this going to end? When are we going to be allowed outside?
Do you think it reflects across a whole lot of self-sufficiency skills and, you know, those traditional sort of home skills, sustainability, you know, with gardening and baking and all of that? Do you think that's been brought into the frame more significantly now?
Yes, I do think it would extend across all of those categories that you just mentioned. I think there's some of the arguments around knitting and crocheting were that it's a portable thing, so you can take it with you. And so Betson's works looked at people with depression and anxiety using knitting as a physical barrier to help when they're in groups of other people. And so I think there's a different take to it for those activities that you can take with you. But obviously, I'm sure if you talk to a passionate gardener or a passionate sourdough baker, because everyone seems to be making their sourdough loaves at the moment, they'd say the same. It's about being in the moment and kneading that dough and, you know, getting the product and the satisfaction of whoever you're sharing the bread with or watching the vegetables grow. So yes, I think there's something about using your hands and being in the moment and not having all those racing thoughts that most of us deal with all the time.
And Pippa, can I ask you about the connection between sort of feminism and, you know, our distancing from handcraft, or just, I don't quite know how to explain that, but, you know, being university educated, sometimes it's hard to own up to, you know, like doing handcraft, you know, for a multitude of reasons. And I'm just wondering, you know, I am a feminist. I appreciate that women can do what they want, but I think maybe can we embrace more these homebody things without having a sense of, you know, being too feminized by it?
Yeah, interesting question. So I too would describe myself as quite a strong feminist, particularly as a mother of two daughters that just thinks it's so important for them to understand what's been fought for in the past and what can easily be lost in the future. And as a child of the 70s, there was definitely a push back of, you know, this is where we're at now, this has been fought for so that you can have equal opportunities and be on an equal level playing field with your peers. And so you should not be looking at within the classroom things that are lesser options, like you need to be doing the academic options. And so Ken Robinson writes about the importance of creativity in education. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work.
No, I'll write his name down.
and it's not so much around the feminist paradigm, but it's around education pedagogy and how we have totally moved away from valuing creative pursuits within the classroom, and we now only value academic pursuits. But that does a disservice to a lot of people, because not everyone's going to shine academically, but also people that do shine academically benefit from those creative pursuits as well. So I think it's actually very important that both are within our education system. And I think as middle-aged women, it's actually really important for people to be more accepting, because like within my colleagues, there's certainly eyebrow raising about the fact that I've gone, okay, I crochet and I think this is important.
Yeah, so we do have to own it, don't we? Because I mean, I know when I stepped out and said, well, I sew my own clothes and I wear secondhand clothes, back in 2013, that it felt like, as particularly when you do it publicly, like my friends knew, but to actually state that, and I think it's important to own it. And we've seen, I feel, a lot of movement in the conversation now that wearing secondhand clothes is seen as a positive rather than a negative. So I think it's only by shining light and ventilating these issues that we can make progress and have a more integrated approach to life.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I think some of that's around speaking about climate change as well, and why it's important for us to be reducing what we're taking, and really thinking about the length of life of clothing items and what's going to happen to the clothing once we've finished with it. And so I think those conversations are important, and I don't think they necessarily happened in the past, but I'm certainly seeing them happen more and more now. I'm certainly seeing, so I work within a medical school, so I guess there's a level of social desirability about what people want and how they present. And in the time I've been there, it's certainly become more common for my colleagues and the students to be talking about the clothes they've got from the op shops, and everyone to be celebrating those great finds. And yeah, that's been noticeable within 5 years. So I think that's quite interesting in and of itself.
And so have you found personally that the pandemic crisis has sort of raised your awareness level about issues around waste and where your resources come from?
Probably not our awareness levels. So both my girls have independently decided to be quite active around climate change in the last 12-18 months, which we've supported them to do that. So they're conversations that have been happening within our household anyhow. But I think what the pandemic has allowed us to do is given us more time. We're not running around dropping kids off at extracurricular activities or to school or to friends' house. So we've got time to do the things that we might like to do normally anyhow. And I think that's the difference. We've got time to change our behaviours, and I'm not too sad about that. We're quite enjoying it.
So when you think about the legacy of the pandemic then, because we're nearly at a point in Australia where we can start thinking about, venturing out again, but what social, cultural and economic changes would you like to see, and do you think we might see as a result of this confronting time that we've been through?
Gosh, I'm so hopeful that we will see some sustained change, because some of the federal government changes that came about very quickly in light of the pandemic were so positive, and things like in terms of raising job seekers, or whatever it was called before, job seekers allowance, and finding shelter for homeless people. And suddenly as a community, we suddenly seem to be able to do these things that we have not addressed for years and years and years. I am, I guess, somewhat cynical whether those changes will be maintained, but I do hope that at least at an individual level, more and more people will question what's important, both on a day-to-day level and on a skill level. And maybe it will be the individual level changes and the community changes that drive bigger picture changes. The one thing that unfortunately makes me think that is possible is obviously we will go into a large recession, and that the impacts of that, I suspect, for most people will be greater than the impacts of the restrictions we've had around trying to reduce the effect of the pandemic. I think, yeah, the mental burden from the recession that follows this will be huge, and I think people's need to live within their means and also to try and maintain their mental well-being will drive some of that.
So that sort of brings us back again to those resourceful self-sufficiency skills, doesn't it? Where you know, like the make do and mend culture that existed in the past, you know, it may well arise again.
Yep, I think it will arise out of necessity rather than being driven through values, because I think in the last couple of years I've seen like colleagues at work change what they're doing because they can see the impact they're having on the environment by buying more and more new clothes, and so buying at an op shop's one little thing they can do, but they currently still have the resources to buy brand new if they want to. But with less and less people having jobs and more of us being threatened with reduced wages and probable job cuts, I think it will become a necessity rather than a choice.
Yeah. So just to finish off, then maybe your you know, your best advice for coping at this time. I mean, in a way, we've covered it to a certain extent, but you know, if you had, you know, one thing in terms of coping with what might be ahead, what would that be?
Oh, look, I think the reality is we don't know what's ahead. Like, I think going into winter, it is possible we have a second wave. And so I'm very much that we just make the most of what we have each day, you know, and as the restrictions ease, we make the most of that. And if we have to go back into lockdown at some point, hopefully we make the most of the fact that we're healthy and, you know, we've got a house that we can be cooped up in, and, you know, just being grateful for the little things, because we actually can't control what's going on around us. And I think trying to think too far ahead and trying to plan too far ahead is fraught with frustrations for people. Yeah.
And in terms of your growing up, or, you know, career things that you've done in the past, how have they helped you cope at this time? Like, where's your resilience coming from?
Yeah, really don't know, Jane. It's just a matter of, you know, like, you've just got to keep going, haven't you? Like, there's no other options, really.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's lovely to chat, and I look forward to hearing more about your research down the track, Pippa. I think you're opening a new area of discussion, so thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Catch you later. Bye.
Bye.